that have come together, and the government is now doing consultation. So part of the national framework that was negotiated in February was that they would consult the people of Canada. The issue is that when people say many different things, it's very easy for the government to just like pick what they like or ignore the majority of it. The plan around the People's Climate Plan was to get people saying similar messaging so that when they ignore us, because this is the Liberal Party of Canada, we will be able, no, but seriously, like we will have it documented, because right now the majority of Canadians trust Justin Trudeau to do the right thing. And we now are going to have to do the work of moving them to understand that he is not on their side. And that is a really important thing if we want to accomplish anything over the next 4 years. So that is why it is really, really important that we have the consultations, that we get the right things said, that we document everything that's said, so that when they don't commit to keep the majority of fossil fuels in the ground, we're going to be able to turn it against them and make it backfire and get stuff done over the next few years.
Great.
Okay, so I'm Amanda, and I'm one of the national organizers on People's Climate Plan, and I'm also supporting work here in Toronto, so happy to be here. So basically, just a brief outline of what Ben and I are going to be talking about. We're going to give a bit of background on the People's Climate Plan, talk about the 3 core principles, which we've worked into the panel, so we're just going to dig into that a bit deeper, and then move into some lessons that we've learned so far from the town halls that have happened already. So, the moment, what is the political climate right now? Why do we have this situation? So, Ben was touching on this a bit already, but basically coming out of COP21 in Paris, the most recent international climate negotiations, the Trudeau government had a mandate that they need to create a climate strategy in order to meet the commitments that they signed on to in Paris. And that process started with a First Minister's meeting with all of the premiers. And the Trudeau government has said that in the coming fall, in October, that's when they will be releasing this new federal climate strategy. In the lead up to that, over the summer, starting in May and going up until the fall, MPs have been invited to host town halls on climate change. So the People's Climate Plan is this coalition that Ben was talking about that's trying to get people to pack those consultations and bring our message of bold climate action and really seize this unique opportunity and show our government that Canadians are demanding more. So, more of... Ben, you want to take this?
Okay, so in terms of like challenges that are going to be coming up, is that the fossil fuel industry is obviously lobbying to not have ambitious action because their business model depends on frying the planet. When the environment minister tweets stuff that she has hashtag all in this together with Suncor, we know that we have a problem. As has been touched on before, Justin Trudeau is super pro-pipelines. The other thing is that we are going to have to expand the movement and work with more people so that we don't get boxed in as just environmentalists. There is going to be a moment that while people like Justin Trudeau can't be trusted, a lot of them are new MPs. They actually just like don't know the issue. An example that I can think of is my Etobicoke Lakeshore MP is a newly elected Liberal, posted in front of a cake that says "Stop KXL." He's just like, and this is the level of failure to understand climate change and their own party policy that a lot of these MPs have, and they have a voice in caucus. So it's very important to try to get them on the right side so that they ask awkward questions without knowing how awkward they are to other Liberals. But seriously, behind the scenes, so that they are forced to move the center of their policy towards the livable climate. And that's why showing up as constituents, as representatives, is so important.
Okay, so what is the People's Climate Plan? Basically, there are 3 core principles that we're uniting around. The scientific imperative, the economic imperative, and the moral imperative, which we're going to dig into a bit deeper in the next coming slides. These principles are deliberately broad so that as many people as possible can see themselves within them. And we're focusing on principles rather than policy, partly because that's what's most memorable, but also because that's how we get our message across. And there are a lot of specific policy nitty-gritty things that we can get into, and it'll come up, but our focus is more on the principles that unite us together as a coalition of diverse groups. So a bit more on the principles.
So it's like in Canada, to expand on that, as I'm sure many people in this room know, if you ask a room of people like this, environmentalists, what their favorite policy is, you'll have 10,000 answers. That's a problem in a government consultation. So what we're trying to do is to create more consistency, because like the core messaging is pretty simple. If you say the same thing enough times, it becomes true, regardless of what it is. This is for good and bad. That's why we're trying to get good messaging said consistently and often and repeatedly, so that it's consistent, coherent, and it gets to as many people as possible. So like take these tools as a way to make your messaging and your favorite policies more effective and consistent, so they actually do what we want it to do. So the first pillar of scientific imperative, pretty simple, it's keep fossil fuels in the ground. It's not controversial in this room. It's getting the government to aim for a 1.5 degrees Celsius target and carbon budget as much as possible, rather than 2 degrees Celsius. It means taking a carbon budget approach. You can connect to it when you rage about pipelines, as I know you will, and things like that. Like, this is not coherent with the science. Saying no to new infrastructure, pretty self-explanatory.
So the second pillar, the economic imperative, is that we want a plan that builds a 100% renewable energy economy by 2050. We know from the experts here on the panel who are talking about it that it's possible. We're seeing it. We're seeing steps being taken in other countries. We're seeing cities like Vancouver and San Diego that are going 100% renewable. So we know it can be done. We know that the precedent is there, and it's really just about telling our government that we want to do that too. We want Canada to do that as well. So part of what transitioning to renewable energy means is that we need to ensure that all workers receive support and training to make the shift to renewable energies. And that includes people who are currently employed in the tar sands. We want to give them support they need to get those clean, safe jobs that they deserve. And we need to be investing in green infrastructure, in public transit, in cooperatives, and creating the jobs of the future.
Okay, and last but certainly not least is we need to make sure that the Liberals hear a message that their plan needs to be centered in justice. So things that are really important to remember, because we do need everyone saying this when you're at the consultation, is UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, specifically free, prior, and informed consent. It was probably the most progressive part of the Liberals' platform when they put it in their platform without knowing what it fully meant. Let's be real. And it is also like a call in the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It is super important that they hear a consistent message that Canadians expect them to fulfill their promise to implement free, prior, and informed consent. Basically, to put it simply, if that goes ahead, tar sands expansion stops and no pipelines get built. We can try on the climate angle, but this one is so much more legal force behind it, as well as like the moral imperative to stop stealing other people's lands, which is very seriously why we need this in the consultation. It also means that Canada needs to do its role internationally. During COP21, we tried to have loss and damage taken out of the UN text. Basically, that means we won't pay for people who deal with the worst impacts of our pollution elsewhere in countries that will be submerged. So it's important that we hear like a justice-based approach for people who will lose their homes and have to deal with the worst consequences of our pollution. Yeah.
Okay, so we've had a few consultations, a few town halls that have happened so far. I was recently at the York one. There was one in Ottawa. We've seen the Maritimes. So we've picked up a few lessons that we want to share to make sure that what we have, that the ones we go to next are even better.
So yeah, so it's really good because like the MPs are super new and they super don't know how easy it is to totally like manipulate their consultations for the ends that we want. So after seeing a few unfold, we're like, oh, they're like rules and we just have to apply them everywhere. But one of the biggest things, like stepping back from the pillars, is how do you communicate them effectively? I apologize to anyone who's already done advanced training and knows this. But it is really important that we frame the pillars, that we frame our messages in terms of stories, in terms of why you came there today and why you care as a human being. So for example, if you have children, or if you care about people who are young, if you're a young person and politicians have been negotiating on this for your entire life, framing your speaking there in the context of a story is going to be a lot more powerful. What we saw at the York consultation is many people just stood up and rattled off a list of the things they like. That's cool. It's also completely not memorable when you've been doing that for an hour and you hear 60 people's climate laundry lists. What was the most powerful moment, far and away, when we went to the York consultation was when Amanda told the story of like going to Anishinaabe First Nation and seeing the environmental racism that the fossil fuel industry has allowed to happen there. And that's where, far and away, it took over the space. Even Liberal MPs were listening to it because it was a story. It's something that people understand. We understand the world of stories. So I can't stress that one enough. Thanks. You don't need to clap. We have a video of it. I'm not totally sure if it's going to work.
I'll give it like a few minutes, maybe. If it doesn't work, I can just talk about Anishinaabe really briefly now, because that's a story that I tell a lot, and clearly it works sometimes. So I don't know how many people are familiar with Anishinaabe, but it's in Sarnia, Ontario, and it's called Chemical Valley. That's where 40% of Canada's petrochemical refineries are located. The reason why I was talking about this at the York Town Hall is one of the questions we were given was, what are your experiences with like climate change and climate policy? And a lot of us were thinking like, well, we don't have very many personal experiences. We're privileged people here in Canada who haven't felt a lot of the worst effects yet. There have been some, but not the worst. So I decided to talk about Anishinaabe because that's where a lot of people are feeling the first effects of the on-site pollution from these fossil fuel companies. So when I was there last summer, I had the opportunity to talk to other women my age, or not much older than me, who are leading the fight against the fossil fuel industry in their own communities. I got to talk to families who told me how they have seen the cancer rates going up in their lifetime because of the pollutants in the air from these petrochemical refineries that are right on their land. Mothers who were telling me about how their children were sent home from school because they were getting sick and they're getting asthma. So this is a community that is literally being suffocated by the fossil fuel industry, but they're standing up to it and they're leading that fight. And I think this is a really poignant example for me on a personal level of it really showed me and put into practice this idea of like listening to Indigenous communities. We talk about it a lot, but I think sometimes it takes an experience to see it. So that's my little story that I like to tell at these town halls, and you'll have an opportunity this afternoon to really think about what it is that brings you here and the stories that you want to tell when you're there. So, another lesson that we learned, becoming a facilitator and a spokesperson. So, just a bit about the structure of the town halls. The MPs haven't been given very strict guidelines on how to host them, but most of them so far have been round tables. There are a couple tables, people are giving questions, and people discuss them for a while. So since there are different tables, it's pretty important that we all spread out and go to different tables. Like, I know we're all friends, but we're not going to like all go to the same table and then just stay there. We want to like go to the different tables, bring our message to other people who maybe didn't come with the People's Climate Plan, who just came as constituents, and share with them what the messages that we want to share regarding the pillars and the stories that we want to tell. And another thing is often there's no official like government appointee who's facilitating these discussions. They kind of just let you talk. Make of that what you will in terms of how seriously they're taking this. But that means that you have an opportunity to kind of guide the discussion, like listening to everyone, but also bringing back those pillars and making sure that people are hearing that. And then oftentimes too, there'll be one person from each table who will speak to the entire room. So if you're comfortable, it's great if you can be that person who can kind of summarize what has been said at the discussion, but bring it back to those pillars. Which relates to centering the pillars, which Ben is going to talk about in more detail.
So just remember, take over the table, basically. There's no nice way of saying it. But that way we'll have consistent messages. We'll be able to really frame the consultation and what the MPs actually hear when they do the consultations. So in terms of getting back to the pillars, the other lesson, a big lesson that we learned, is that they ask pretty BS leading questions to each of the tables. So for example, at the York region, they divided everyone up into tables and gave different tables different questions. Such as, what should we do for clean jobs while growing the economy? So like questions that there's a specific answer that they want to hear from that. So what we found in our debrief from that is just like acknowledge the question, then ignore it and get back to the 3 pillars. Because I'm serious, we don't have time for them running us in circles. So a really effective technique that people use when preparing for media interviews is the easy acronym is ABC, which is acknowledge the question, bridge the question, and then connect back to your content. So acknowledge if the question is how can we grow the economy and clean jobs. You can talk about it for the first 30 seconds, you'll probably have 3 minutes to speak. But then in the second, bridge to your actual talking point. And what we need, for example, is to keep fossil fuels in the ground, go to 100% clean energy economy, and put UNDRIP into Canadian law. An example of that is if your key message, for example, is keeping fossil fuel in the ground, you can say, yes, we need jobs. We also need a climate that can support them, meaning we need to keep fossil fuel in the ground. So bridging, finding a way to go back to your content all the time and avoiding their questions because they don't want to sing things that are uncomfortable for them is really important.
Okay, so just a note on how the government is structuring this. We're structuring it in terms of the 3 pillars, science, economy, justice. The government has their own kind of structure. There's these 4 working groups, and they are how and where to reduce emissions, ideas for clean technology, innovation and jobs, preparing for the impacts of climate change, and putting a price on carbon. So these are the working groups that are creating the report that will come out in the fall. And many of the town halls are following this as a structure. Sometimes they literally just make these the tables. Sometimes they give you questions that kind of loosely fall into them. So some of these quite easily relate to the pillars, such as the clean technology and jobs. You can relate that pretty easily to the 100% renewable. Some of them are a bit harder. But we're going to have a chance this afternoon to practice making sure that we always include the pillars within that framework. So we've got 3 pillars, 4 working groups. We're going to practice merging that stuff. Anything else, Ben? Okay, Lynn's going to say a few words, and that's about it for Ben and I, so thanks for listening to us.